The man in the blue blazer was already filming Sarah when he accused her of stealing his laptop. His phone was 3 inches from her face while he shouted that this airport was full of thieves and that she probably auctioned bags on the side. Behind him, the line of tired travelers grew, and someone muttered that they just wanted their stuff. Sarah felt the familiar burn in her chest and kept repeating the script she knew by heart, that Lost and Found could only release items properly tagged and verified. By the time her supervisor stepped in, the laptop turned out to be sitting in TSA secondary screening, and the man stormed off without an apology. Her supervisor just sighed and handed her a plastic crate full of dust-coated electronics. "End of quarter purge day," he said, even without meaning to sound harsh. "Anything unclaimed past a year is getting shipped to the city surplus auction. Log them and will them down." In the crate she saw one thing that did not match the others. A matte black laptop in a snug neoprene sleeve, tag number smudged but readable, and under it a sealed anti-static bag with a slim SSD, taped to a yellow locker ticket marked overdue 24 months. The locker number had a red X on the manifest, meaning rent unpaid since forever. At the surplus cage, the warehouse guy scanned the pallet and shrugged at her when she asked if staff could bid on these things. "Anyone can," he said, "online auction, sometimes no one bothers with the tech lots." That night in her studio apartment on the southwest side of Chicago, Sarah watched the listing pop up, a blurry photo of a plastic bin labeled mixed electronics, minimum bid $25. She bid $27 and no one outbid her. When she picked it up, the laptop and that sealed SSD were at the bottom under dead routers and a cracked iPad. At home, she set the laptop on her wobbly coffee table, wiped the airport dust off with an old t-shirt, pressed the power button, and saw a login screen flash for 2 seconds before the battery died and the room went dark with it. The next morning, she was back under the humming fluorescent lights, eyes gritty from scrolling forums about airport surplus until 2 in the morning. In the break room, her coworker Marco poked at his cereal and laughed when she told him what she had bought. "So you paid to take e-waste home," he said. "I would have given you an old toaster for free." She tried to laugh along, but the locker ticket bothered her. 2 years overdue at the airport meant at least 3 rounds of certified letters and a formal abandonment notice. Someone had really walked away from that SSD. At lunch, she went down to the baggage services office and asked the clerk if she could see the old locker logs. The woman raised an eyebrow and told her she was not supposed to go fishing through closed files. Then she noticed the locker number on the ticket that Sarah had accidentally left on the counter and sighed. "That unit had been drilled out and cleared last year," she said. "Some business traveler never came back, corporate card bounced, they boxed it all and sent it to storage. After that it went to surplus." When Sarah finished her shift, she wrestled the airport bin from her trunk up 3 flights of stairs, the plastic digging into her palms. The SSD in its crinkly silver sleeve felt surprisingly heavy for something so thin. Back in the apartment, she dug through a drawer for an old universal laptop charger, set the voltage, held her breath, and plugged the laptop in. The charge light blinked amber, then green. When it finally booted, she expected family photos or a company logo. Instead, she saw a sparse desktop with only a few icons and a folder on the taskbar named Wallet Tools. She clicked it, a window opened with unfamiliar app names and a text file labeled README cold storage, and then the whole system froze and threw a drive error that she did not understand at all. She spent her next day off doing what she always did when something at work did not make sense. She made coffee, opened her old second-hand desktop, and started taking notes. The laptop drive clearly had issues, so she focused on the SSD. The anti-static bag was heat-sealed, the label handwritten with a date from 3 years back and 2 words in block letters: "Backup Vault." She slit the edge with kitchen scissors and slid the drive out, metal cool and smooth between her fingers. She found a spare SATA cable, popped the side panel of her desktop, and connected the SSD like she had seen in a YouTube tutorial. When she powered the machine, Windows greeted the drive with a warning that it needed to be formatted. Every guide she had read the night before said those exact words were a trap. She canceled the prompt, hands clammy on the mouse, and booted instead from a Linux USB she had created in the morning. Under the unfamiliar Linux file manager, the SSD finally showed its contents. A directory named cold_storage, another called keys, and inside them encrypted backup files and 2 PDFs that actually opened. The first was a printed instruction sheet, lines of plain text explaining that these files were backups for Bitcoin wallets and that the seed phrases were never to touch the internet. The second PDF was simply a page with 12 English words, big font, a warning on top in all caps telling the owner to memorize and destroy the paper copy. Sarah stared at the words, copied them carefully by hand on the back of a grocery receipt, then recopied them onto a fresh notebook page. Her heart pounded in a way that reminded her of sprinting to catch a tight connection. She downloaded an open-source Bitcoin wallet, switched her phone to airplane mode, typed in the 12 words and watched as a balance slowly populated on the screen. It was not huge, maybe a few $1,000s equivalent, but it proved the key was real. Then she saw another file, plain text, buried in the keys folder, labeled retirement_main. Inside was another seed phrase and below it a note that said simply final stack, do not touch until everything is ready. Her hands shook enough that she had to set the notebook down before trying those words. By Monday, Sarah had convinced herself that she had misunderstood something. People did not just abandon digital fortunes in airport lockers. On her lunch break, she sat in the employee cafeteria scrolling corporate policy on her phone. Unclaimed property went through a formal process. Notices mailed to the last known address, a public listing on the city website, and then sale through the surplus system. The buyer got everything as is. That was clear for laptops and watches. For invisible strings of numbers that could move across borders in seconds, the rules were not. She Googled the name that appeared once in a configuration file, an email handle tied to the wallet software. It matched a consulting firm in Toronto that had dissolved 2 years earlier. On LinkedIn, the supposed owner profile was frozen in time. Work experience ended abruptly. No obituary, no social media, just silence. That night, she went to a free legal clinic in Pilsen that did walk-in consultations. She described a hypothetical where someone legally bought a used computer from a government auction and later found access to forgotten cryptocurrency. The law student who met with her frowned, tapping a pen on the desk. Physical media from the auction was clearly hers, he said. But the underlying funds were a gray area. If no one claimed them and she documented everything, the state was unlikely to chase her. At home, she sat in front of the monitor for a long time with the retirement_main words in front of her. Finally, she opened a separate wallet app, entered the phrase and waited. When the balance appeared, she actually checked the number 3 times, then opened a price chart to make sure she was not misplacing a decimal. It was more than 10 years of her current salary. She created an account at a regulated U.S. exchange using her real name and imported a tiny sliver of that wallet, the equivalent of a couple $100, then initiated a test transfer. The longest 15 minutes of her life passed with her pacing between the kitchen and the window until her phone buzzed with a confirmation that the deposit had cleared. With that confirmation came something heavier than excitement. Responsibility sat on her shoulders like a loaded backpack. The next day she requested a personal day and took a train downtown to a small law office she had found online that specialized in digital assets. She paid for an hour with an older attorney who listened quietly while she laid everything out in more detail, leaving out only the locker location. He leaned back, fingers steepled, and said that abandoned property law had not fully caught up with crypto. The state had given up on the items when they sold them. The previous owner had not responded to multiple notices. Legally, she had a strong position if anyone ever surfaced. Ethically, he added, only she could decide whether to build a life from something somebody else had once planned as their exit plan. He advised meticulous records, conservative withdrawals, and paying every cent of taxes. On her way home, she stopped at her sister Lena's apartment. The kids were shouting over a video game and the sink was full of dishes. Lena joked that Sarah must have finally found a missing Louis Vuitton bag and was there to announce early retirement. Sarah laughed it off, but when she left, the crowded 2-bedroom and the tired slump in her sister's shoulders stayed with her. Over the next 6 months, she turned a portion of the Bitcoin into dollars in small, regular chunks. Each time she logged in, she felt a mix of guilt and gratitude and documented every transaction in a spreadsheet. Through a local small business center, she drafted a plan for an independent travel agency focused on complicated itineraries, bereavement fairs, and rebooking nightmares she knew too well from behind the lost and found counter. She signed a lease on a tiny storefront near Midway, painted the walls herself on weekends, and ordered a modest sign with the name Open Gate Travel. When she quit her airport job, her supervisor shook her hand and said he was surprised she was trading a stable paycheck for the chaos of entrepreneurship. She smiled and replied that she was finally ready for a different kind of chaos. 2 months after opening, she closed the office for a week and showed up at Lena's with 3 printed itineraries. "Pack a bag," she told her siblings, "we are going to Costa Rica together. Flights are booked and the passports are already sorted. The only thing you have to worry about is choosing a window or an aisle." On the flight south, somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, Sarah watched her younger brother press his forehead against the window, whispering that he had never seen the ocean from above. Lena kept scrolling through photos of the hotel, still half convinced that the airline would suddenly announce a mistake and send them back. None of them knew that the deposits for the trip had come from a cold wallet once taped to a forgotten locker door. To them, it was just Sarah finally catching a lucky break. Back in Chicago, Open Gate Travel slowly built a reputation among nurses, airport staff, and people who had once been stranded in foreign terminals with no one to call. Sarah specialized in situations where bags vanished and plans collapsed, and she often found herself on hold with the same airlines whose lost property bins she used to empty. She never mentioned the origin of her seed money. She just quietly paid vendors on time and offered payment plans to clients who needed them. The SSD and the laptop ended up in a fireproof box at her bank, along with a printed letter explaining, in simple language, how the wallets worked and how to find her documentation. If one day someone connected the dots and claimed the coins, she wanted a clear trail to show that she had not hidden anything. Until then, she treated the remaining Bitcoin as an unpredictable partner, something to be respected rather than worshipped. Sometimes, when a news story about cryptocurrency bubbles played in the background at the office, she would glance at the framed photo on her desk from that first trip. Her nephew grinning with a surfboard too big for him, Lena laughing with her feet in the Pacific, Sarah herself in the corner of the frame, sunburned and startled by her own smile. What stayed with her was not the thought of how close the SSD had come to a landfill, or how easily some other clerk could have grabbed that auction lot. It was the quiet realization that most of the lives she saw passing through the airport were full of abandoned plans no one would ever reclaim. She had simply stumbled on one and decided to carry it forward. Years later, when a nervous young client confessed that he was scared to spend his small savings on a trip to see his father in Bogota, Sarah told him about a woman who once bought a bin of forgotten electronics for $27 and built a new life out of the keys stored inside. She left out the part about Bitcoin and legal opinions and market charts. She just said that sometimes the only way to honor what has been lost is to go somewhere you have never been and make sure you do not leave yourself behind this time.